Hey, Scott.
Hello.
Welcome to 2026, everyone. We're glad you're all here or watching this later. So we had to skip your topic from December, and so here you are, and we have an opportunity to hear it now. So we're grateful for that.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the why of sex addiction. This is titled "The Why of Sex Addiction: It's not about the betrayed partner," because a lot of times betrayed partners think that their husband, I'll be sexist and say their husband, um, his behavior is about them. It's a referendum on that. No, nothing you did or didn't do caused your partner to cheat, whether he's a sex addict or a porn addict or not an addict, just a cheater. Nothing you did or didn't do caused that choice. Um, Nothing you do or don't do will get him sober or will change his behavior. Um, your partner's choice to cheat is not your fault. It is not a referendum on you. It was not done to attack you or hurt you. Um, your partner did it for his own reasons, and we'll get into those in a little while. Sex addicts in particular, but cheaters in general, will sometimes act like it's your fault. They will point the finger at you. You're a nag. You're this. I don't get enough attention. They will blame you and gaslight you into thinking it's your own fault. Um, this is not an intentional attack on you, unless they're really, really a jerk, and I assume that's possible. But mostly, what this is, particularly with sex addicts, is a defense mechanism. Addicts use this defense mechanism so they don't have to feel so much shame and guilt about what they're doing. Um, so I will blame someone else. Otherwise, I have to look at myself, and I really, truly don't want to do that. Um, so if it's not about the betrayed partner, and it isn't, what is it about? What causes sex addiction? Um, First of all, I want to say that why a person is sexually addicted is relatively unimportant in the early stages of healing and recovery. It doesn't really matter. That's later, it does matter. In deeper stages of recovery, we do look at the why. But this question in early recovery is posed often repeatedly by both the addict and the betrayed partner. And sometimes, particularly addicts, are unable to move on until they get an answer. So we're going to give an answer. So I'm doing this for two reasons. Number one, if you're an addict and you're stuck in the why, okay, I'm going to tell you why. And if you're a betrayed partner and you're thinking that you did something, or your partner's telling you you did something or didn't do something, no. I want to make that clear. So there are two primary risk factors for any kind of addiction: sex addiction, porn addiction, alcohol, drugs, whatever, gambling, anything. Two primary risk factors: overarching nature and nurture. Um, nature is genetics. You know, the fact of the matter is there are some genetic factors, genetic mutations that can either increase or decrease, indirectly or directly, the risk for addiction. Um, Usually, this occurs by altering the ways in which a substance, like alcohol, for instance, is experienced and processed in the body and the brain. There's a genetic mutation where certain people, they have less body sway, less physical reactivity to alcohol. They're much more likely to become alcoholics because they don't get sick when they drink. Um, there are studies. There's a genetic mutation that magnifies the pleasurable effects of addictive substances and behaviors. That increases the risk for addiction. Um, if anybody knows anybody of East Asian ancestry and you've ever seen them drink, they tend to turn bright red and they get headaches. They get like hangover symptoms almost immediately after
Oh,
drinking. That's a genetic mutation. People of East Asian ancestry who have this genetic mutation, which is most of them, they're much less likely to become alcoholics than anybody else. They're still susceptible to other forms of addiction. It's only alcohol that's impacted, but they process alcohol differently in the body and they get sick right away. Ugh. They're basically allergic to alcohol. So, hey, they don't drink a lot of alcohol. Um, you know, So there's all kinds of genetic factors like that. Mostly we've studied alcohol and sometimes cocaine as, for genetic factors. We haven't really looked at them for sex addiction yet. I wish they would. Genetic factors can also contribute indirectly to addiction or less addiction. Genetics can be a factor with a lot of psychiatric disorders, depression, anxiety, attention deficit disorders, panic disorders, bipolar, social phobia, all kinds of things. And not surprisingly, a lot of people with these disorders will choose to self-medicate with alcohol or drugs or an addictive behavior, particularly people with depression and bipolar disorder. Very, very heavy chance of addiction goes way up. And those can be genetically linked. Indirect genetics also come in with heritable personality traits like impulsivity, risk taking, novelty seeking, abnormal stress reactivity, things like that. They test this, you can test little kids for impulsivity. Um, they use marshmallows usually. You tell them you can have one marshmallow and then they can have, or if they have one marshmallow now, they can have three later. Or they can have two marshmallows now and none later. The impulsive kids, two marshmallows, boom, boom, right away. The non-impulsive kids, one now, three later. Guess who's more likely to be addicted later in life? The two marshmallow kids. That's impulsivity. It's like give me now. Um, and that's a heritable trait. If the parents are two marshmallows, the kids are two marshmallows. Not always, but a lot of the time. Um, the second and more important risk factor is nurture or environment. Um, Genetics, it can play a role, but genetics are not an automatic sense. Environment will trump it every single time. Research, you know, well, let's just talk about some environmental risk factors. First, and one of the most important environmental risk factors is early exposure to an addictive substance or behavior. The earlier we are exposed to a substance or behavior, the more likely we are to get addicted. And I mean, it really goes up fast as we get younger. The lower the age of first use, the higher the likelihood of addiction. This is true with all forms of addiction, including sex addiction. Um, Interestingly, with sex addiction, whether sex was vilified in the home or glorified in the home, a large percentage of sex addicts were unusually aware of it at an unusually early age. Some houses like grandpa had a room full of porn and everyone knew. Uh, that's glorified sex. Mom's sex toy was on the coffee table, that kind of stuff. Or, like my house, sex is dirty. We don't talk about it. It was vilified but there was this undercurrent of, you know, whatever, that, it's never talked about or discussed or addressed in a healthy way. Um, you know, Speaking of early exposure, the last credible study about porn use among children uh, was done like 20 plus years ago. It's very hard to study these things because, first of all, kids don't tell you the truth. Second of all, they're not supposed to see, et cetera, et cetera. Very hard to study. And I'll get back to you. Um, so, uh, but it found, well, first of all, there was a guy in Canada, this is 20, 25 years ago. He tried to study porn use among adolescent boys. Um, and he couldn't because he couldn't find any adolescent boys who hadn't used porn. He wanted to see the impacts of porn use on boys, and he couldn't study it because he had no control group. Um, then there was a Swedish study that found the average age of exposure to pornography for boys and girls was 11. Now, I can tell you, I had not hit puberty at 11. I mean, this is prepubescent, and this was like 20, 25 years ago, before the current onslaught of pornography. Um, the average age of porn use is no longer 11. It is lower for both boys and girls, but definitely boys. Kids have seen it, and we have a tsunami of porn addicts. the average age of my porn addiction work groups, even over the last 5 years, has dropped probably about 10 years. I mean, I still have guys coming in their 80s, but I have a lot more guys who are like 19, 20, 21 coming in because they're porn addicts at that early age. And because and most of them were using since they were 6 or 8 or 10, whether they saw it intentionally or somebody showed it to them or, they just stumbled across it. It hit them. They got a rush from it and they kept going back. So early exposure. Um, where am I here? The biggest risk factor, though, is childhood trauma. And Tammy and I have talked about this before. We're going to talk about it again today. Um, Abused, and this is all research based, by the way, abused and or neglected children are incredibly at risk for addiction. And by the way, other adult life psychological issues, regardless of genetic influence. You know, the more times a child is traumatized, the greater the likelihood of adverse reactions, such as addiction later in life. Um, this is a study. The study was done by Kaiser. It was a massive study. Um, Survivors of chronic childhood trauma, meaning 4 or more significant trauma experiences by the age of 18, like a family member went to jail, or somebody died, or there's a car wreck and they were injured. 4 or more traumatic experiences. Um, they're 1.8 times as likely to smoke, 1.9 times as likely to become obese. So basically double here. 2.4 times as likely to have anxiety, 3.6 times as likely to be depressed, 3.6 times as likely to qualify as promiscuous, so self-soothing through sexual behavior, 7.2 times as likely to become alcoholic, and the risk for IV drug use goes up 11.1 times. I mean, that's a survey. So, our risk for depression, anxiety, and addiction doubles, triples, quadruples, it just goes through the roof. Um, one survey asking sex addicts about their childhoods. Now, this is sex addicts specifically, self-identified sex addicts. 97% of them reported emotional abuse. 83% reported sexual abuse, either overt or covert. I'll talk about the difference in a second. And 71% reported physical abuse, like violence in the home. And by the way, violence in the home, whether it's done to you or you witness it being done to another family member, the impacts are the same. Um, Now to covert and overt in incest or sexual abuse. Overt sexual abuse is obvious. It's hands-on. Somebody is touching your private parts. Somebody's, showing you something. Somebody's, overt, or excuse me, covert incest is a little different. Um, Covert incest occurs when a parent emotionally partners with a child. Like I was mommy's little husband. She would take me out of school and we would go on a date when I was like 8. A date. That's what she called it. We'd go out to lunch, we'd go see a movie that was an adult date movie. You know, she would sit a little too close. She would tell me how handsome I was, and it got worse. It got a little overt as we got older. Um, the impacts of overt and covert incest are the same, by the way. So if you're a betrayed partner and your husband is also mommy's husband, there's something that he needs to address in therapy, and he's going to have to set some boundaries, and it's going to be hard. And you're probably like, please cut your mother off, because anyway. Um, so lots of emotional abuse, neglect. There's a great book by Enid Gray called "Neglect: The Silent Abuser." The impacts of neglect are far-reaching, and we always think of a neglected kid as the kid who's wearing like stinky clothes and you know has bread with no peanut butter and jelly on it for lunch. Yeah, that is a form of neglect, but there's emotional neglect, there's spiritual neglect, there's relational neglect where relationships are not modeled. Kids just don't get the attention and the emotional attention, the physical attention, and a healthy physical attention, or this spiritual or guidance attention that they need. That's a form of neglect, and it's just as hurtful as the kid who doesn't have enough to eat. Um, so what happens here? with trauma in particular is um, children. Children are born into the world. We are narcissistic. We are reliant on other people for everything when we're born. We become less, and everything's all about us. If I'm crying and nobody comes, there must be something wrong with me. We get less narcissistic, hopefully, as we get older. Not everyone does, but most of us get. We start to realize that other people have, thoughts and feelings and things they need to do that aren't about me. But but we stay pretty narcissistic through childhood. So when we're getting emotionally abused or physically abused or sexually abused, we have done something wrong. Our little brains tell us there's something wrong with me, and nobody cares about me. Nobody's taking care of me. Nobody's interested in my thoughts, my feelings, my needs. So when I have a bad day, I learn don't go to anyone else. I mean, in my house, I love my dad. Um, there was no there there. He was an alcoholic, workaholic, nice man, good provider, funny, smart, showed up at every game, but emotionally, nothing there. If I had a bad day and went to him, I would get more response from one of our cats than him. Um, and if I went to my mother, who's, among other things, a narcissist, she would make it all about it. She would either tell me you're too sensitive because she didn't want to deal with it, or she would go yell at a coach or a teacher or a neighbor, which was mortifying. Or she would look at me and say, "Why are you doing this to me?" Because I was upsetting her by being upset. Um, and all of those told me, don't bother. Um, whichever parent I went to, don't bother because I'm never going to get a hug in a conversation like that kid who knocked you down and spit on you is kind of a jerk. Maybe you should look for other friends. Here's a hug. You didn't do anything wrong. No, it never happened. Um, we all have our own version of that. So we start self-soothing. We start taking self-soothing our own emotions. You know, cookies, TV, video games, books. I read everything in the house. I was reading Jean Le Carre when I was 6. First of all, I was a good reader, and that's what was in the house. That's how I escaped in fantasy games. And I used to play tackle football in the backyard by myself, which the neighbor women thought was hilarious. But also, it's like your kid needs to go to it. It's like, your kid's not getting enough attention. Um, you know, we learn to self-soothe, and a time comes when we find out about alcohol and marijuana and masturbation. And if I can go in the room in my bedroom when it's crazy in the house and lock my door, and do my thing there, I can escape for a while. um, and sexual fantasy is a powerful, powerful escape. We don't have time to get into the neurobiology today, but sexual fantasy gives us a high that ranks up there with cocaine. Um, sex addict brains and cocaine addict brains on an fMRI scan, they're indistinguishable. It is a huge high that we get from the anticipation and fantasy of sex. So, you know, it works. These coping mechanisms, whether they're cookies and TV or alcohol and pot and pills and masturbation and sex with strangers and chatting online and all that stuff, they work because these are highly distracting behaviors. They don't ever meet our underlying needs. What we're escaping is the pain of our unmet underlying needs. I say we because I'm a sex addict and an alcoholic and a drug addict. Um, and I was escaping the pain of my unmet needs because nobody was giving me a hug and telling me it was going to be okay. So I learned engage in a super stimulating behavior, sex, or get drunk or get high, and the pain will go away. The problem with that is the pain doesn't go away. It just gets masked or we escape from it temporarily. And then I come back around and all that pain is still there once I sober up, or have my orgasm, which sobers us up immediately. The pain is still there. And I've got some shame about what I just did usually. So it's even worse. So that's the cycle of addiction. I feel crappy. I act out. I feel crappier. I act out. I feel even crappier still. So it's more of a downward spiral um, of me numbing and then coming back to the real world and being so miserable that I have to numb again. Um, Over time, our coping mechanisms, become addiction because talking to other people doesn't work, or I think it won't work. And unfortunately, we carry this into our adult lives. We carry the coping mechanism, the addictive behavior, and we also carry these negative core beliefs. No one will meet my needs. No one cares about my needs. Even after I get married and have a loving partner who wants desperately to know me and love me and comfort me, I don't trust it because I learned early on I am not worthy. We call this shame. I'm not worthy of being loved the way that people need to be loved. Uh, so we do things to self-soothe. I'm going to get mine, self-soothe, and we will also, because we don't want to feel our own shame, we will blame our partners and our loved ones for our choices. Um, you know, this is particularly with sex addicts, by the way. Trauma, there's a lot of different traumas, but sex addicts, the percentage of sexual trauma in early life is pretty high. Even if the addict doesn't always identify it as sexual trauma. I'll have guys in my sex addiction group say, well, the babysitter was over one day and she had me touching her breasts and it was really exciting. And I'm like, how old were you? I was like, 8. I'm like, okay, all right. You have eroticized sexual abuse. You have taken control of the uncontrollable by making it exciting. Um, and, 8-year-olds should not be touching the babysitter's breasts. This is what we call molestation. This is sexual abuse. This is people go to jail for this. You know, um, we learn to self-soothe by reenacting the trauma, or trauma bonding. Sometimes we call it. It's a very common response to any kind of abuse, but especially sexual abuse. We will eroticize it. We either keep ourselves in the victim role or we put ourselves in the power role. But either way, we eroticize it, and it meshes into our addictive behavior and becomes a coping mechanism for what we were initially trying to run away from, which is weird. But anyway, uh, addiction. I'm getting into the weeds. Sorry. Addiction is a what we call a maladaptive coping mechanism. It's not me attacking my partner, who I love very much and find very attractive. It's not me, not loving my partner, not being attracted to my partner. It's not a referendum on my partner. It is a referendum on me. My shame drives me toward escape rather than turning to a person who loves me for comfort and to get my emotional needs met. I escape my emotional needs because my shame tells me no one gives a shit. Um, so I escape into a substance or behavior. That is what addiction's about. Long-term healing for addicts, short-term healing, let's break through your denial. Part of denial is blaming. That's one of the ways we engage in denial. Let's break through your denial. Let's stop the behavior. Let's create a plan of social support and professional support to get and keep you sober in the moment. Then the next stage, and this is where the why of addiction matters. We start looking at underlying issues. What is the childhood wounds that we need to help you repair? Um, and we also start looking at how can we repair our relationship? Can we build better coping skills? Because addicts typically, once we get into recovery, we'll get sober, and then we realize we have no communication skills with our partner because we've never communicated intimately with another human being. It's been too scary. So we work on that, or we work on underlying trauma issues. And by the way, for anybody who's interested, Dr. Eddie Caparucci has 2 groups coming up: a 12-week group called Why Men Struggle to Love, and a 12-week group called Going Deeper. It looks at the inner child stuff. And then Troy, I think his start on the 12th and 13th. And then Troy Love has a group called Healing Attachment Wounds. It's a 6-week group, and I think we're starting that one on the 20th of this month. So if there are addicts out there and you're looking for some work on your underlying issues. Dr. Eddie and Troy are both brilliant. And this is what they do. They specialize in this stuff. So sign up for one of those work groups. Um, we also have an out of the doghouse if anybody wants to work on relationship issues. I think that one starts on the 13th. They're got a bunch of Tuesday groups this time. Um, and that is a lot of me talking with a voice that is about to go off the rails. So, Tammy, any thoughts or anything you want
Well,
to add?
I was going to ask you to, but I will. So he's mentioned work groups. I put a link for the work groups, and I was going to ask how to do this, but since I'm going to give his voice a little break. So the work groups are fee-based. This is free. We have lots of free resources, but work groups are psychoeducation. They are not therapy. Many of the participants are there because their therapists have suggested that it would benefit them, and it does. And he mentioned a number of them, but here's the deal. Lots of people want to go, oh, I want to go work on the trauma. And I really appreciate that Scott honed in on do this work first and then. And
Yeah,
that, I hear all the time from people of like, well, either I or my partner, my betraying partner is, doing all of this trauma work. They want to understand and they've got all of this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, but they're not sober yet. They're not,
yeah,
they haven't stopped the acting out. You
right,
can't work on that stuff. That's, Scott mentioned the maladaptive coping mechanism. Those are the reasons. And so until you have the security, you have the support to be able to handle that, and this is a journey. Like I recognized, I've been in recovery for a long time, and I don't know, 5, 7 years ago, especially Troy loved the attachment wounds that he talked about. I went, oh, there's another thing. It didn't keep me from being on this journey the whole time. It was just another label. It was another thing to go, oh, there that is. Yeah, Scott also mentioned, so let me back up. Psychoeducation, 6 or 12 week courses. I put the link, you can find them on Seeking Integrity under the work group tab, and there are betrayed partner work groups.
yes,
The betrayed partner work group, Angela Spearman does a great job with that, and then Debbie McCrae does the boundaries, healthy boundaries, and both
yeah,
of those are fantastic and will help support partners on this journey. But they are supplemental. They are not enough. I've had other people go, my husband went to the sex addiction 101 and he didn't get magically better. That was the underlying mess. And I was like, yeah, no, if that's all he was
yeah,
doing. And she even owned
yeah,
he wasn't really participating. I'm like, well, it isn't
yeah,
osmosis. We have to actually do the work. And just so check those out. They really are supportive. I gotta tell you, Scott, because you said uh nobody you know nobody told you that it was going to be okay. Nobody told you that you are okay,
right. Okay.
and so you never had that. Like, it's not just about that it's going to be okay. You didn't get the support and message that you are okay just for who you are, that you aren't mommy's little, boyfriend, like none of those things. And so, yeah, the setup, I was also thinking about genetics, and and people go, well, like, if he's a sex addict then his children are going to be a sex addict. No, there's a lot, not necessarily. Like, if
Right,
people get the right nurturing,
right,
that can be the setup, and then if stuff happens, it can go, either way. But there's a lot of betrayed partners, who, even though their husbands, I'm using all of that, but
right.
their husband's a sex addict, but that does not mean your children are automatically good.
Yeah,
They may have gotten enough. I love that Scott talked about Neglect, the Silent Abuser by
yeah,
Dr. Enid Gray. Like, there's a whole bunch of things that, like, if you get enough, it
yeah,
isn't an automatic. So
yeah.
y-
You can study identical twins who are separated at birth, and their genetic parents are addicts. And you put them in two different households and you watch them. And if one household is dysfunctional, that kid's probably going to be an addict. But the other household is not, that kid's probably not going to be an addict. When I say environment trumps genetics pretty much every time, it really does. So, just because there's addiction in your house now as adults doesn't mean your kids have to become addicts. Um, so, yeah.
And I love that you pointed this out, that this is like it, yes, sex and porn addiction. And I know the intimate betrayal of, of that for partners. And, this is a setup for any form of addiction or
Right,
compulsive behavior. So it isn't like, like this is all different. Now, that said, we do recommend if there's, sex and porn addiction, if you're working with a qualified therapist, that would be a certified sex addiction therapist, because they're training. They've got
right,
150 hours plus of training on sex addiction. So there is there is that, and that is different than somebody who's a certified, alcohol and drug addiction counselor, like very different training, and this is highly specialized. So getting the right help if this has become an issue. And I will go back to the many resources, you're here on a webinar. Great. We also have drop-in groups, and we've got, podcasts and previously recorded webinars. We've got so many support sessions. Scott and I both, and a few colleagues do, offer support sessions that are 25 or 50 minutes. Dr. Rob does an expert consultation for couples. We have resources, including expert residential treatment for men who are struggling with these issues. There is the ability to really hone in and get a solid, you work through some of that stuff, but again, it's a lifelong journey, but you would have a solid plan and the support to be able to move forward in a different way. So we want healing for people. These are resources to help. Okay, so let's start with some questions. My partner and I are doing a therapeutic separation after the fourth D-Day, which happened after we were both seeing CSATs, which has been a huge betrayal for me. And I finally realized he needed to do the work on his essay without me in the same household. It's been over 2 months, and he still shuts down in shame whenever I try to discuss my feelings and how easily I get triggered. I feel like we need couples counseling to be able to get to a place where we can live together again. I'm just worried his deep shame is really going to factor in the repair work needed. I understand it takes a long time to recover from SA, but I just find it frustrating that I'm not being heard. What is the best way to have those difficult discussions about my safety moving forward? He would be a fantastic candidate for our expert residential treatment program.
yeah.
Like, you guys are stuck. Like, and you're right. Take time and all that kind of stuff. If he's serious about doing the work, like, it isn't just for people who are actively, in their addiction. Some of them have stopped, they're in abstinence, but they aren't making any forward movement,
Elsewhere.
yeah. So, Scott, what are your thoughts?
Well, I want to address therapeutic separation because there's a lot of confusion about what a therapeutic separation is. First of all, a therapeutic separation involves therapists. That's why we call it therapist or therapeutic. There should be goals for each of you.
Hmm.
The addict has these goals. These are the milestones that he's going to work on. Again, I'm being sexist. The partner has goals that she's going to work on. Again, I'm being sexist. I apologize. Um, there's a time frame. We're going to come back together with both of our CSATs or a couples therapist, whichever we're working, however we're working it. And we're going to sit down and we're going to check in at 30 days. How are these goals going? How are these goals going? Okay, another 30 days apart. Usually there's a time limit. Like, we're going to try and come back together at the 60 or 90-day mark. But these are the benchmarks that we both have to meet so that we can come together and then start working on the relationship. Um, is that the book on therapeutic separation, Tammy, or
It's the webinar, but they actually
the
did a
webinar?
workbook. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Like, they did. There's actually a
it's good.
workbook for both of
It's
you.
really
Like,
good.
yeah, it's really good.
Yeah. Um, so I don't know. Like, I want to discuss my feelings. Okay, I get it, and you feel like when you try, you're not being heard. That's because some benchmarks haven't been met that need to be met before we come together. And I tell you how much pain I'm in. Although when guys come to residential, they do get an impact letter from their partners. So you can definitely get to do that. Um, betrayed partners often feel unheard. And because the shame button is pushed inadvertently, I'm trying to tell you how I feel, but I receive it as an addict, as an attack. It pushes my shame button. Suddenly, I'm the worst person ever. I go into a shame spiral and I literally cannot hear you. I go into fight, flight, or freeze. Um, Fight, I get defensive. Flight, I just completely, I go into my nothing box. We were discussing the nothing box in my work group, alumni group last night, where I just, it's like buzzing. I can't hear you. Or I just freeze. I just sit there and stare at you. You know, any of those three responses, these are the autonomic nervous system kicking in. These are meant to kick in when I'm being attacked by a bear. Not when my partner is trying to express feelings, but because of my shame, it feels like I'm being attacked by a bear. So I fight, flight, freeze. Um, I, as the addict, need to do a bunch of work before I'm going to be able to hear you. And this is part of the purpose of a therapeutic separation is I'm unable to heal while my shame button, even inadvertently, is getting pushed, and you're unable to heal when I can't hear you. This is when we get stuck. This is the purpose of therapeutic separation. It's the purpose of residential treatment. It's like, let's separate it. Let's do some work. Let's hit some benchmarks so that we can come together as a couple and work on our relationship. Um, and at that point, the addict might also be working on underlying issues along with the relationship. And by the way, the partner might be working on childhood trauma issues at that point too. Um, but in the beginning, it's all about let's make it through the day without strangling each other. Let's figure out who's going to pick the kids up from school and and see if we can manage that without screaming at each other. Um, because betrayal trauma, it puts everything in our lives in crisis. Everything I thought we had is now in question. My relationship might be ending. My self-esteem is disintegrating. Whether I'm the addict or the partner, my self-esteem is disintegrating. So this is the purpose of therapeutic separation. Not every couple needs one, by the way. Most couples don't. But when you do, make sure you have a plan. This is how long until we check in again. Here are the benchmarks we want to see. Work on this with your therapist before you separate. Um,
And I'm going to add, work on it with your therapist with the help of that workbook, is
oh yeah,
really helpful because most therapists aren't even trained in this. When we were
right.
doing the webinar, I think I interrupted him and I said, wait, clarify, because taking it outside of the addiction and sex addiction arena, like lots of relationships are in crisis and they're talking about separating, and there's no guidelines, and so they created something that can actually be useful, and it is, and like Scott was talking about, and I used to say, oh, 30 or 60 days or whatever, and they said no, a minimum of 90 days. Again, they did the research, they came up with these things. So check out the webinar. There's also a podcast with Dr. Rob on sex, love, and addiction. It's Dr. Stevie Hall and Lindsay Stanley. Really helpful. Check that out, because this is not a do-it-yourself. It's like disclosure, it's not a do-it-yourself job. Who would ever know how to do this on your own? And again, many therapists, even CSATs, don't know. These two have been training more therapists, so there's still many that are not. So check it out for yourself. I think it would be useful. But I would really encourage you to consider, him joining the Seeking Integrity residential program. I think that would be. Check out the endorsements. Like, those are unsolicited. Those are people that have reached out after your treatment, both the addict partner and the betrayed partner, and have shared. And then we say, may we use this anonymously on the website? And that's where that data or that information comes from. So those are people that, real people that have experienced healing, on that journey. So. Okay, the next one, Scott. Where do CSATs draw the line between addiction and bad behavior, narcissism, emotional immaturity, culture, etc.? If someone cheats not out of escape and not trying to numb out because of an opportunity, they are discovered by a spouse and have no trouble stopping cheating behavior, no transition to other behaviors or substances, what would this be considered? I feel like many CSATs are unwilling to acknowledge the existence of cheating that occurs due to culture, toxic masculinity. I'm going
Yeah.
to jump in on this one. So,
Okay.
CSATs are certified sex addiction therapists. That training is specifically for addiction. They have assessment tools, including a 600 question assessment that they can provide clients that will I mean, that helps identify. So they are not, I mean, you're talking about a community of thousands of therapists. They're all humans. They're all trained in lots of other things. So I can't speak globally for that, but they have the assessment tools to be able to identify if someone is
Yeah.
struggling with addiction and compulsive behaviors, or is, emotionally immature, or whatever else, they are doing. So I mean, they have the tools to be able to do that. So I think it would be misguided to say that they're all are,
Yeah.
but they're also certified sex addiction therapists. So most of the people that are coming to them are struggling with, compulsive sexual behaviors and are struggling to, stop those behaviors and, have hurt partners and themselves and everything else, struggling with denial. So thoughts?
Um, I would say that not every person who cheats is a sex addict.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
period. And not, by the way,
Yeah.
not every sex addict cheats. I was single
Right.
through my addiction. I wasn't cheating on anybody, but boy, was I a sex addict.
Yeah.
Um,
Good
so,
clarification.
you know, one of the things that happens sometimes, guys who are not sex addicted will sign up for my sex addiction work group. And usually they schedule a session with me beforehand. And I say something like, well, look, here's the deal. You cheated, and everything we cover in the part one work group is going to apply to you, whether you're an addict or not. So why don't you take, and they usually end up saying, wow, I'm so glad I took this. It was really helpful. And then we move them instead of into part two, where we look at the underlying issues, like I talked about today, we'll move them into the out of the doghouse group where they can work on relational repair, or the healthy intimacy group where they can work on communication skills. Um, Whether you're an addict or not, if you've cheated, the initial path of healing for the cheater slash addict is the same. Break through the denial, all the lies you tell yourself to make it okay, um, and develop some skills that you can use to not do this again. That's early recovery, whether you're an addict or not. Anytime you want to change a behavior, that's the first early recovery. After that, things change. What you need to work on after that. Um, you know, CSATs should be good at just delineating this is addiction, this is not addiction. And I'll tell guys, you know what, you're right. I don't think you're an addict, but you still need to be in this group, and then we'll talk. Um, I don't care if people identify as an addict or not when they come to my groups. They have a problem with their sexual behavior. The first 6 weeks of the sex group or the porn group is going to help them. Then I'll talk to them about take this one next. Or do this next. Uh, so yeah, but not yeah, not every sex addict cheats. Not every cheater is a sex addict.
Yeah, well, and Dr. Rob talks often about, uh, behavioral issues require behavioral
Yeah,
help. And yes, so just what Scott was saying, that is practical behavioral help to do that. And if somebody, he can, magically stop, and I use that, like, and not go to any other behaviors, then great, but it would also be, yeah, and Dr. Rob was talking about this too, the emotional immaturity, that they're not caring about someone else, to go that this consequence of my behavior, choosing to do this, like cheating, is going to have a negative effect on someone else. So it can be those things, but I would not want to say that CSATs, all, none of them recognize any of these things. They absolutely do. I mean, that's part of what the assessment and screening, provides. Okay, can you speak to entitlement? What about the person who is over validated by parents and never held accountable? My husband's parents thought they were above the rules, and this also played out in my husband not following rules of monogamous relationship. One could say addiction to validation, but wouldn't that make most people addicts? Yeah, I use the term king maybe, in these kind of things, like, so thoughts?
Um, well, first of all, I said autonomic nervous system, and it was sympathetic. Thank you for the
Oh,
person
thank
who
you.
pointed that out to me. I
Oh,
appreciate that.
uh,
Um, yeah, look, sometimes guys in our treatment center, they identify, I'm a sex, love, and validation addict. Okay, fine. Um, it's manifesting sexually or relationally. Um, you know, over validation. My husband's parents thought they were above rules. Okay, this is what I call a boundaryless household. There are, when kids have rules, they're not really rules, they're boundaries meant to keep the child safe. You're 3 years old on your tricycle, don't go in the street. That's not a rule, it's a boundary trying to keep you safe. As you get older, the boundaries loosen a little bit. When you're 12, you can ride your bike in the street, but look both ways, that kind of thing. Um, Parents do set boundaries for kids. Um, Relationships should set boundaries for the relationship. The couples should say, these are our boundaries. This is what we mean by monogamous. This is acceptable. This is not. Some relationships, pornography might be okay. Other relationships, not. It depends on the couple and their personal values and how they were raised and, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but entitlements. A lot, a lot of addicts, we look narcissistic and entitled. Now, whether those are core problems for us or not, we look that way because of our addiction. Um, we act that way because of our addiction. Um, a lot of times we are chasing validation that we can't get we didn't get from our parents. Um, and somewhere along the way, we get the message. I got the message that if someone is willing to have sex with me, I must be worthwhile. I must be a real person if somebody will take their clothes off for me. I mean, that's messed up. It's a messed up way of thinking, but I learned that as a kid. So it sounds like your partner learned as a kid that, I'm king baby. I get whatever I want. But what he didn't get was boundaries. He didn't get healthy modeling of life or a relationship. And he probably also did not get healthy validation of himself as a person, which is why he's turning to porn or prostitutes or affair partners or whatever he's doing. Um, you know, and when guys at our treatment center are in 12-step meetings, I'm a sex, porn, love, and validation addict. That's what they're talking about. I'm part of my behavior is I am seeking a way to feel okay. I'm seeking some external esteem. And this is where things run off the rails. I mean, yeah, everybody wants a little external esteem. I love a good pat on the back. I do. Tell me I did a good job. Oh, thank you. But at the end of the day, that does not fill the empty bucket in my soul. I have a hole in my soul. It's a bucket and it's empty because it's leaky. It has holes punched in it, and those holes are from trauma and neglect and abuse. And until I patch the holes in my bucket, nothing can fill it. There's not enough validation or alcohol or drugs or sex or porn in the world to fill that bucket. I can pour a bunch of stuff in it and feel okay for a few minutes or a few hours, but it leaks out. Um, I patch those holes by looking at my childhood trauma, building the self-esteem I never had, debunking my shame. My shame tells me if I tell you the truth about me, you will run away screaming. Well, I pretty much told the truth about myself, and we got a whole bunch of people here still listening. It's been proven over and over and over that when I tell the truth about myself, some people are like, but most people are like, wow, tell me more, and it helps with my shame and it helps build my self-esteem. Um, I feel like I'm rambling and maybe not answering the question, but you know, I was told early in recovery, you want to build your self-esteem, behave in esteemable ways. And I kind of took that to heart. And that meant A, be sober, stop behaving in horrible ways. Um, B, start being of service, start helping other people, you know, be a better person. And your self-esteem will increase and the need for this external validation will drop. And this is a lot of the sort of second and third level work of recovery that we do. I mean, I wasn't working on this in the first year or two of my sobriety. I was trying to stay sober. Um, After that, I started working on, trauma and self-esteem and, internal validation versus external. Um, and that was a big old ramble, Tammy. Please clean that
No,
up
no,
for me
no,
if you
no,
can.
no, no. I'm tracking the whole thing, and I agree. And yes, I same thing. I did not go, oh, I want to go work on my self-esteem and being a better person. I wanted to stop the pain. I wanted to stop the problem behavior, all of those things. And then yes, like I started going like, oh, I'm not doing those things, and I'm interacting with people in a very different way, and I could start to see, often really honestly reflected through them initially, that like I was okay, and it wasn't because of like you said, like all of our messed up ways we were trying to get. Well, I must be okay because you're whatever with me, yes, it was very uh, I agree with the hole in the soul, the buckets, the empty. And yeah, yeah, I honestly feel like my bucket is pretty solid now. I even probably added some extra layers. It's a little thicker and I can contain things. May even be bigger. I appreciate outside kind words and things like that, but I don't need it, like I did. And the need was so great. Nobody ever, or a bunch of people could never, make it okay. And so recovery changes everything. But like you said, it's the later order. The first esteemable things I did was not keep doing the things I was doing in the first place. That was absolutely where I needed to start, was stop acting out, stop drinking, stop drugging, stop doing all of the things I was doing. So that's where we start, and then we can start on those later things as we've got the support and security of that foundation of recovery. So yes, all good. Okay, next question. Can you
Can you,
describe
can you,
what you mean? Go ahead.
can you jump to the next one real quick, and then we'll go back to that one.
Why are there no male betrayed partner groups on scene? There are. There's
Yeah,
actually, on Tuesday night there is a male betrayed partner group. It's been going for 6 years.
yeah,
And then the Sunday night is a mixed gender. That's the only mixed gender betrayed partner group. It's the only mixed gender group we have. But the Tuesday night, and I'll put, I mean, it's on the website with
yeah.
those. But yeah, that's been running. John
And
B has been running that for years.
our online work groups for betrayed partners are mixed gender. Men are
Yes,
welcome
yes.
in
The
those
work
groups,
group, yes, for with Angela Spearman, that one is a mixed gender.
and Debbie McCrae. Those are both mixed
Hers
gender.
wasn't before, is it now?
Oh, maybe I'll
Yeah,
check, but at least
check on
Angela
that.
Spearman's
Yeah,
is.
Angela's
Um,
is, yes, yeah.
okay. Okay. Another
Okay.
question.
Can you describe what you mean by compulsive when we're talking about compulsive behaviors? I was thinking the marshmallows.
Yeah, that's
Mm.
impulsive.
Yeah, that's true.
Impulsive, compulsive, very,
True.
very tied together. Look, there are the two 12-step groups I started in were Sex Addicts Anonymous, so addictive, and Sexual Compulsives Anonymous, compulsive. And it was the same group with a different name. I mean, it was like the same guys that meet. You know, compulsive is I do things whether I want to or not. you know, Obsessive compulsive disorder, we don't call obsessive compulsive disorder addiction because it lacks the pleasure element. I'm counting the tiles on the ceiling. I don't get pleasure. I'm washing my hands in scalding hot water over and over. And this is not pleasurable. I keep going back and checking to see if the stove is on. This is not pleasurable. It's still compulsive. I don't want to do it, but I'm compelled to do it. I can't stop myself even when I want to stop myself. Now, that description applies to addiction too. Addiction just has a pleasure element. Alcohol gives us pleasure unless we have one of those genetic mutations that makes us sick. You know, Sexual fantasy gives us pleasure. Looking at naked people gives us pleasure. I mean, depending on the person, but um, you know, smoking pot gives us pleasure. Eating gives us pleasure. Um, you know, by the way, addiction is a pleasure reaction run off the rails. It's a maladaptive coping mechanism, but it's a pleasure mechanism too. I get pleasure when I eat. I get a blast of dopamine. That's our pleasure neurochemical when I eat because I need to eat. You know, that pleasure is communicated to the mood and memory center. My mood elevates. I remember that. And I think, oh, that eating thing is kind of nice. I think I'll do it again in about 3 or 4 hours. You know, I get pleasure because it keeps me alive. I get pleasure from sex because if I don't have sex once in a while, the species will die out. Um, you know, I get pleasure from hanging out with my friends because this goes back to early man when I was, if I went hunting by myself and I ran into a saber-toothed tiger, I'm dinner. If we go hunting and we run into a saber-toothed tiger, the tiger is dinner and I have a new fur coat. So I get pleasure for hanging out with my friends. Fur is murder, whatever. Come spray me with red paint. I don't care. All right, fine. But um, we get pleasure from life-sustaining activities. Well, drinking alcohol, not necessarily a life-sustaining activity. Looking at porn, going to prostitutes, not pleasure response, run off the rails. Um, you know, and then it becomes and turns into a maladaptive coping mechanism. I turn to this super intense pleasure response to escape my painful feelings that are the result of my unmet emotional needs. Um, so, but compulsive, I do it even if I don't want to. I do it. Alcoholics joke in A means I drank because the sun came up. I drank because the sun went down. I drank because I had a bad day. I drank because I had a good. That's compulsive. I drink. You know, I drank. That's what I did. And until we put a system in place to help us stop, and this is true with any compulsion or addiction, it's about stopping first things first, stop the behavior. And 9 times out of 10, we need help. 99 times out of 100, 999 out of 1,000, we need help. Look, if I could have gotten sober on my own, I wouldn't be here right now. If Tami could have gotten sober on her own, she wouldn't be here right now. We tried, we failed, we got some help, and we succeeded. That's how compulsivity and addiction we heal. We get help.
Yeah, to tag on to like I would wake up in the morning and get told what I did. I was often in a blackout.
Yeah,
That was just one of my things. And then I would go, oh, I don't want to do that again. I'm not going to do that again today. And you know what?
did it
It would
again.
be the same thing over and over. I could not stop until unless I got the help, and so like Scott said, I'm incredibly grateful to have had that. But it is that like it's hard for a partner to understand this because you don't struggle with that because you can go, yeah, I'm not going to go eat the whole box of cookies, oh, great, like but that would be my go-to. I'm going to go eat the whole box of cookies because I'll feel better, what, until we learn to start to go, what am I looking for? I mean, we have to examine all of our actions and everything else, so that what is my intention, what is my goal with this? If I go eat the whole box of cookies, sure, I'll feel really good for like, well, I'm in a sugar coma, and then I'm going to have so much regret and shame, so it's not going to ultimately fill that hole in my soul. Fill that hole in the bucket. So
Yeah,
it's
I'm
the
gonna end.
shift of things.
Yeah, I'm gonna end this with a funny story, which you just
Okay,
reminded
please.
me of, like waking up and like not remembering.
Yeah.
Um, when I was in college, I lived in a fraternity and we had an award. I'm not going to give you the real name because it's kind of foul, but it was the Dumb Person of the Week award, basically.
Hmm.
And whoever won the award had to keep. We had a big giant traveling moose head, and you had to keep it in your room that week. And I didn't realize how often I won that award until one of my female friends came over one day and looked up and said, "Where's your moose head?"
Oh, wow. Yeah.
She thought I was my moose head. So
Yes.
there we go.
Yes. It
That's
should have just had
addiction.
your name on, on
Yeah,
the
yeah. I think they
lanyard
may have
around
named
it.
it after
Yeah.
me when I graduated.
Well,
All
great
right.
topic. It was a lot of good information. Thank you all for joining us and asking questions. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you next time. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.